Hey guys, Dr. Garth Davis here. I uh, I find myself in a position of whether or not I need to sit here and answer questions about a video made by this guy, who, look at that face. A doctor watches What the Health. An actual doctor. An actual doctor. I guess the implication is that I am not an actual doctor. You can see right there, I've got the MD next to my name. I've got the certificates. In fact, I've got the certificates that say I graduated with high honors from medical school, and I've been in practice for 16 years. Not only am I in practice as a doctor, I'm in practice as an obesity specialist. I do surgical and medical obesity. I'm boarded in both. And I have a very, very long experience taking care of people from a diet standpoint. And I agreed to participate in What the Health because I thought they were going to draw a very, very important correlation between the way funding happens to some of the major medical organizations and the reasons you hear some of the dietary recommendations you hear. And so this video here, look, okay, first of all, who is Z-Dog? So let's talk about Z-Dog right here. So Z-Dog, who is now coming in as the expert, was a hospitalist. Now, for those of you that don't know what that is, a hospitalist is someone who works in the hospital treating people that are acutely ill. They never have any outpatient setting where they're treating patients. He left that field, but you got to understand that he has no, and I mean no, background in long-term preventative maintenance of health through diet. He is not an obesity medicine specialist. He is not a specialist who has done anything past medical school with nutrition, and we all know the problems with medical school nutrition. You just don't get that much of it. Now, typically I wouldn't even answer this video. It's kind of beneath me. The guy is a jokester. He's humorous. I admit the guy's kind of funny. If I didn't know any better, I would laugh. His facial expressions are they're pretty funny. And I could see if you don't look, this is the problem with the world, right? The problem with the world is we have too much information. Like George Orwell thought that we would be taken over by a dominating figure such as Trump, who was going to control our brains and everything. But really, Aldous Huxley captured it better in his assessment that we wouldn't really care anymore. There'd be so much information out there that we wouldn't really have any knowledge one way or the other. It would seem almost like relativism, like, well, this guy says this and this guy says that, so it all must be fake. And so we put out, or the directors put out, What the Health, and you get that kind of expression on the face, and you think to yourself, wow, that real doctor is so shocked by the stuff. This must all be BS. And I tell you some of the things that he starts. Look, okay, first of all, his video, he is laughing and making fun of the movie from the credit line, from the very beginning. Do you really think that someone that would make fun of the movie from the very beginning of the movie is going to learn anything important from the movie? Then his first complaint right off the bat is he's like, why are they making this movie? You've got to be stupid to tell people these things. These are common sense things. If you eat bad things, you're going to get sick. If it's so common sense, then you got to ask the question, why are we so sick? We have one of the highest rates of obesity in the world. We have one of the lowest longevities in the world. And despite the fact that we don't have socialized medicine, we spend more money per capita than any other country on healthcare. We're doing something wrong. His first real complaint comes in with the diabetes section, and he asks who is Dr. Neal Barnard to be the expert on diabetes. Well, Dr. Barnard has a very, very good paper that is commonly cited, and you could look it up in that was a 72-week study on vegan diet versus the ADA diet for diabetic control. And he's actually written some very, very good articles. In fact, in the Obesity Society meeting, one of his articles got best article of the year, where they're comparing several diets for weight loss, and of course the vegan diet did the best. But besides that fact, obviously, Z Dog. I can't believe I'm doing a video about a guy named Z Dog, but anyway. Z Dog says that fat is not the cause of diabetes, it's carbs. This is a very common misconception. Now, for someone who hasn't studied any of, I mean, this guy has not studied diabetes in depth, it's very obvious. Intramyocellular fat, and by the way, I'm not, look, I wrote a book with hundreds and hundreds of references, and I can't go through that all right now. It would bore the life out of you, and I would not be as entertaining as Z Dog. But the basics is this: if you eat fatty diet and it gets into the cells in your muscle, it interferes with your muscle's ability to make insulin receptors, then you become insulin resistant. We've got many, many studies to show that. He says in the video, fat in the blood, that doesn't make you insulin. He doesn't quite get it. It's fat in the muscle cells, intramyocellular fat. He missed that. But there's been many studies on this, and he puts on that that kind of funny, that shocked face when we say in the movie that meat is strongly correlated with obesity. Now, with diabetes. Now, I'll tell you, Z-Dog's never heard of the study, the EPIC trial. That's because Z-Dog, again, I can't believe I'm calling this guy Z-Dog. Z-Dog has never, ever read the EPIC trial or studied the EPIC trial. It was one of the largest epidemiologic studies on diet and disease processes, including diabetes. And there was a strong correlation between meat consumption and diabetes, as was also seen in the Adventist Health Study. The vegans did far better. I mean, a vegan with diabetes is a very rare phenomena, whereas meat eaters with diabetes is a very common phenomena. I see it on a daily basis, which is something that Z-Dog doesn't see because he's not sitting. I can't do a fancy video like him because he's not sitting on a day-to-day basis seeing patients for these disease processes, treating them, and then seeing the results. He then makes fun of me and asks, have I ever done a physiology class? Look, we live in such just utterly bizarre times where we live on social media and criticize each other without any kind of like rational discourse. Does he really think I'm just making stuff up when I say this? He really starts making fun at the point where I say that you cannot turn carbs to fat, or it's very difficult, I say, to turn carbs to fat, and it's true. It's called de novo lipogenesis, a term I'm not sure Z-Dog has ever heard, but it's been very, very well studied. I recommend, Z-Dog, if you're watching this, look at Hellerstein's articles on this. It is very difficult for the body to turn carbs into fat. The de novo lipo process requires that you be in way calorie excess and that all your glycogen stores, your storage of carbs in your muscle cells, be saturated before any of that fat any of those carbs will be turned to fat. And in order to do that, it takes energy. So you're actually burning energy in order to do that. There was a really good study where they did a in-hospital study. They put people in wards and they studied this, and they found that when you really carb load somebody for 4 days, I mean, you give them tons of carbs, very, very, very small percentage of that gets turned to fat. Now, if you are insulin resistant because you've got fat in your muscles and your muscles can't put out insulin receptors, and you eat a high carb diet, that will cause your carb levels to raise. And if your carb levels raise, your insulin level raise. Insulin does cut off hormone sensitive lipase, which means that your cells will retain fat. This is getting kind of complex. I'm not sure if Z-Dog could follow me. The bottom line is, yeah, simple carbs mixed with a fatty diet, the standard American diet, is going to give you insulin resistance and is going to facilitate fat being held in the body when you eat it. But if you're eating a very high carb diet with a very low fat diet, basically a fruit and vegetable, beans, whole food, plant-based diet, which we recommend, you're not going to get insulin resistance, or very few people will. And it's actually a pretty good treatment for diabetes, which I use it for often. And look, let's just use some common sense, okay? We are one of the most overweight countries in the world, and we keep getting more and more overweight. And people say, well, then the low-fat diet didn't work. We never went on a low-fat diet. In fact, we eat a lot more fat now, both by content and by percentage than we did 20 to 30 years ago. We also eat more of just about everything except fruits and vegetables. But if you look around the world and you look at the countries or the societies that have done the best, it's hard to look at countries because they're big and really heterogeneous. But if you look, for instance, at the blue zones were several areas where people had long, healthy lives. There's no obesity doctor in the blue zones treating people for being overweight. The blue zones basically are living very healthy lives. And if you look at all the blue zones that they did, Ikaria, Okinawa, the Nicoyan Peninsula of Costa Rica, the Seventh Day of Venice. If you look at their diets are extremely carb heavy, extremely. In Okinawa, they're eating tons and tons of yams. That's the vast majority of your diet. Lots of grains and breads and stuff in Sardinia, beans and rice and vegetables and fruits in the Nicoyan Peninsula of Costa Rica. They're eating tons of carbs. They did a study on Chinese centenarians, and the vast majority of what they eat, 80% was carbs. So how come they're not fat? Dr. McDougall has this comment: "The fat you eat is the fat you wear," and Z-Dog, again seems to have a problem with this. He said the fat you eat is not the fat you wear. That fat can be utilized as ketones, and he's correct about that if you're in ketosis. Do you know how few people? No one's in ketosis. The only people that are in ketosis are people that are starving or doing an Atkins or ketosis-based diet, where they've depleted their body of glycogen, so their body goes into an emergency mechanism where it utilizes fat exclusively for fuel. I used to treat people with ketosis diets. I got very, very bad results, good initial results, but everybody gained back their weight, so I stopped doing it, and I did not think it was a healthy diet. But in the normal human being, you don't eat fat and turn it immediately to fuel. In fact, there are lots of science that I don't think Z-Dog has looked at, where if you radioactively label fat and eat it, it does go very fast to the fat stores. That's what they are. They're fat stores. They're there to store fat and calorie. You do utilize some of the fat for energy, just as you utilize carbs in your muscles. But if you're really pushing yourself in exercise, you're mainly going to be using carbohydrates for fuel. But it's a mixture. It's like your body does a mixture of fuels. But you do store that fat right away. Carbs do not get stored as fat. They get stored as glycogen in muscle cells so they can be readily available for energy. And look, we live in a very, very bizarre world right now. I mean, facts have just gone out the window. Science has gone out the window. It's amazing to me if you look online and search some of this stuff. All the stuff that comes up comes from bloggers and non-scientists. And these people are so certain in their beliefs that they will find anything to back it, but they never have a real dialogue, and they never even look at the other side, and they don't even know the other literature. And the funny thing to me is that they'll say to me, well, that's an epidemiology study, and that's correlation, not causation. Well, then I'll show them an actual randomized controlled trial, and they'll just ignore that. Or they'll say, look at this study that I've got here, and it's the same thing. It's correlation, not causation. For some of you, this is really boring. And I'm not a humorist. I got to go and actually treat patients on a day-to-day basis. And the reason I'm so busy is I'm so successful treating these patients. And so that's my response to Z-Dog's view on What the Health. I think What the Health shows you that money talks. I think people know this nowadays. We see it in government. I mean, if you look at our food policy, the USDA recommends that we eat 1/4 of our plate from fruit, 1/4 from vegetables, 1/4 from grains, and 1/4 from protein, which can be vegetable protein. And yet our farm bills give no money whatsoever to fruit and vegetables, and the vast majority of the money goes towards grains to feed animals and to animal agriculture, which is why a hamburger isn't $11, it's 49 cents, but a salad's $4. The same thing is going on, and I think it was very telling that we know damn well that processed meat is a carcinogen. We know that, no doubt, and yet processed meats recognized, like recommended from the American Cancer Society on their web pages, and we know that meat is correlated with diabetes, and yet is recommended in the Diabetics Association. And you got to start asking these questions why. And I think the guys in What the Health did a good job about that. Hope you guys are enjoying the movie. I can't. There's going to be lots of complaints about the movie. I can't sit there and argue with every one of them. I've got to treat patients. Look, you could believe me and the science and everything I present and all the different scientific studies that I spent years studying, or you can believe Z-Dog. That's your choice. All right, take care, peeps.